Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the ERM Toolbox webinar. This is the combined webinar for November and December due to schedule issues related to the end of the year holidays. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. One, if you've dialed in by phone but you haven't joined us by web and you would like to see the slides and the application screens that will be shown during the presentation, please point your web browser to readytalk.com. In the box where it says Participant Join a Meeting, enter the same access code that you used to join the call, 987-9821. We will be leaving the phone lines open for now. If the noise becomes an issue, I will mute them from this end. Please do stay aware of the level of noise in your area, and if it starts to get noisy, you can mute your own phone. If you are called away from your phone, please do not put your phone on hold, because that will cause your hold music to be transmitted to the rest of the call. You can simply hang up, dial back in again, and it will not disrupt the webinar. We are leaving the phone lines open, as I said, so you can ask questions as they come up. Also, the chat box is available. If you want to type a question there, it will allow the presenter to address it when he has a moment to pause in the presentation. So I would like to introduce Sean McLeod, who is a managing consultant at IBM. He has recently joined the UCOP team in March of this year as a functional analysis for TM1 and is the TM1 lead. So I will now hand the controls over to Sean to speak to us of TM1. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Emily, and good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time out of your busy schedules for this presentation this morning. Let me move to the first slide. The title slide, actually. So today we're going to be talking about what's referred to here as UC Plan, which includes all of the TM1 initiatives that are being developed at UCOP. The first one to be developed, and the one that's closest to completion, is the budget development system. But there are a few other applications in the pipeline, and towards the end of the presentation I'll speak a little bit about those. But the UC Plan and the TM1 Budget Development System will be the subject of today's discussion. So my objectives for today include introducing TM1 and explaining its functionality. I'll discuss a high-level overview of the UCOP Budget Development System, and we'll have a brief demo. And then at the end we'll discuss a little bit more in depth where the project stands today. So before I get into the TM1 technology and everything, I just want to explain who has been working and who has been in charge of this TM1 BDS development. On the UCOP side, Assistant Finance Director Maria Anguiano was leading this effort, and she was assisted by Rob Judd as the project lead. And then on the IBM side, Chris Hodge is our lead TM1 developer, and myself, a lead TM1 functional analyst, and we're supported by other folks at IBM, including people who work to keep the environment up and running and the Cognos BI report writing. So it was really good for us when we came in March to start this project that Maria and Rob and UCOP itself actually had been working for a few months in defining their budget process. So they were well on their way to certainly understanding their budget process and had documented so much, and then when we came in to do the TM1 development, they did a lot of the groundwork that actually IBM usually does in working with clients and doing all of that process analysis. So we were helped very much along. So what is IBM's Cognos TM1? Well, first of all, the TM in the TM1 stands for Table Management, in case you were wondering. And what TM1 is, it's a flexible financial management and performance management solution that focuses on these three critical questions. And basically, any organization that's mission-driven, as the University of California is, should be, and probably is, asking itself, what should we be doing, why are we doing it, and how are we doing it? And certainly, the University of California, given its role in the state and in the population of the state, even tangentially related to the government because because of its funding, the how are we doing it is something that is of critical importance. So the TM1 application certainly addresses the how are we doing it in terms of allowing the users of TM1 to do planning and forecasting. So really TM1's strength, as opposed to other applications that are looking at historical information, the benefit of TM1 is this planning and forecasting focus that is part of the application, because it takes information from disparate areas within an organization, whether it's flat files, whether it's other databases, whether it's user input, and it puts that into a format that can be used to plan and forecast plan versus actual. So that is accomplished, of course, by consolidating all of this information, usually into some reporting format, be they online or reports that can be printed out and shared or emailed, which allows people within the organization to perform their primary function, which is analysis of data, analysis of information, so that the organization can make strategic decisions about where it's been and where it needs to go. So just a quick little overview of where is TM1 being used. TM1 is an IBM Cognos software product, and it's being used at over 2,000 organizations, including some of these marquee firms that you see here. And the DFAS is the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, so they do all of the finance and accounting for the Pentagon, which also has a huge budget. So you can imagine that TM1 is a robust tool for doing such financial management. So this slide, what is Cognos TM1 technically speaking? And I'm not a technical person, although I've learned a lot over my time working here at UCOP and in working with TM1. But one thing that you will hear in talking about TM1 is this concept of a cube. And cubes are basically how the data is organized from relational tables. So you have a bunch of different tables. There's one element from one table that relates to another table, and then you have multiple tables like this. Pretty soon you have what we refer to as a cube. So if you think of Excel as a flat table with columns across the top and rows down the side, and information is stored at the intersection of cells, well, then if you think of TM1 as I'm sorry, let me back up. So in Excel you have information in Excel files, but then when you want to do analysis on that Excel information, people often use pivot tables. So you have a lot of information from a database, or you have a very large spreadsheet and you want to slice and dice it in a different way. You put that information into a pivot table. Well, Cognos TM1 Cube is like a pivot table on steroids. That's how my colleague Chris explained it in one of our user meetings to help someone understand conceptually about these cubes. And so a cube, in this simple example, is a payroll cube. You might have information in a table about employees, such as, of course, name and social security number, age, date of birth, that kind of thing. You'd also have fiscal year data looking at over time, over a whole year or a month or semi-months, and then salary information. And then the circle shows that information, just like in an Excel spreadsheet, is populated in a cell. So all that information intersects, and then it can be accessed on a cell level. So in a sense, what you see in TM1, because it's table-oriented, will look familiar to most users because it has a similar look to Excel. So that explains the cube concept. And then with Cognos TM1 and what we've implemented at UCOP with the budget development system is this what we call TM1 Contributor. And that is a web-based interface for TM1, so that anyone who has access to a browser and anyone who's authenticated as a user can go into the system and interact with the system, enter information, pull out reports, do their job basically in a web browser. So it's not something that's resident on their machine. However, TM1 Perspectives is another Cognos piece that's available that is integrated with Microsoft Excel. So anyone that has Microsoft Excel on their desktop and then purchases TM1 Perspectives can use Excel basically to write to a database that's not on their machine but hosted on a server somewhere. So those are probably the two main areas of TM1 that might be used here at UCOP, contributor and perspectives. Architect and web, I won't go too much into those, but architect is sort of the backbone and the structure that sets up TM1, and TM1 web is a scaled down version of the application, but that's also web-based. So with TM1 Contributor, it's very powerful. It allows users to enter and analyze data. From that data, people can build charts and export information to Excel. People can share information in PDF reports and Excel files with other individuals who do not have access to the application. And it just basically allows the drilling down, the pivoting, selecting, and filtering of data that's necessary for analysis. So that's an aspect, of course, that's very important to an organization such as UCOP, which is doing budget development. So what was the goal of the budget development system? Like, why was it needed, and why did UCOP come to IBM and work with IBM to come up with this solution? Well, it's interesting because we're about to enter the first budget cycle starting in January, when we'll be using TM1 live for the first budget cycle. But in previous years, the budget development and forecasting process required the budget department to work largely in Excel files and organize data manually. So it was time intensive and poorly defined. It didn't allow for standard budget reports in a useful way that could be accessed by people when they needed the information. And because of all that, it limited the strategic management of the financial resources in a way that needed to be addressed. So the new system will have a standardized budget format process, and we're about to enter that, where individuals in departments, subdivisions, divisions will enter and review information for the budget for the coming fiscal year. There's going to be access to robust reporting using Cognos BI, and there will be, in addition to just budget versus actual type reports and comparing plan versus actual, there will be a suite of KPIs and executive dashboard reports that will be used by executives here at UCOP to better understand the organization, how things are being spent, and how resources need to be directed. So, as I mentioned, the BDS system is using TM1 Contributor, and TM1 Contributor is uniquely set up to work with UCOP because it's hierarchical. Just as most organizations are, the TM1 Contributor application is also hierarchically structured. And when I do the demo, I'll be able to show you clearly how that looks. But in the middle, you have the blue area, which consists of the UCOP divisions, which are broken down into subdivisions and departments. And then in departments, there are accounts. And it's at the account level that all of this budget information is collected and entered. Then on the left, the budget department, after all of the divisions have entered their information, they consolidate, analyze, format, work with the divisions if revisions need to be made, but they ultimately end up preparing a budget that's to be submitted to the Regents in the April timeframe for approval for the coming fiscal year, which begins on July 1. And all of this, of course, is happening with the oversight of UCOP executives and the Regents for the budget approval and budget sign-off, so that the budget that is signed off and is approved by the Regents becomes the baseline come July 1 for the next fiscal year. So this is sort of what I was also explaining in the previous slide. The budget timeline at the top, the critical times are in January, when the budget call begins and departments start entering their budget information for their employees and their supplies and expenses, and the budget is developed, and then it's submitted to the budget department. And then in the April time frame, the Regents will approve the budget, and then come July 1, that budget, it becomes the active budget for the next fiscal year. So TM1, as I've been emphasizing, is going to and is helping UCOP with these three critical areas that are shown in the dark blue: the budget development cycle, the budget reporting and monitoring phase, and with strategic management. So the budget development, as I mentioned, will be starting in January, and then all departments will be involved in creating the budget. And then after July 1 is when the budget monitoring and reporting will take place, so that once we've established a baseline with the adopted budget for the fiscal year, departments, divisions, subdivisions, whoever's interested in looking at how their actuals are compared to their budget will be able to go in and create Cognos BI reports, to generate Cognos BI reports to compare their plan versus actual. And all of this is also in line with UCOP's strategic vision of management of resources in a strategic fashion, and allowing executive management to both review the budget as it's going to be adopted, as well as understanding in the coming fiscal year how those resources are actually being used, and be able to speak to stakeholders about how the university is spending its money. So now I'm going to show you the typical screen, and in a couple of slides we're going to switch over to the application so that this becomes even more clear. But there, on the left over here, I've identified what's called the navigation pane. And this navigation pane basically is the UCOP hierarchy. So it starts at the top with the Office of the President, and then within that there are the subdivisions, and then within that there are divisions, and then within the divisions there are subdivisions, and then within the subdivisions are departments, and then down to the account level. So all of the work that will be done in TM1 will be done at the account level, and all of that information will be aggregated at the department level for review and approval, and then once all of that information is approved at the department level, it will be aggregated again at the subdivision level for review and approval, and right up the hierarchy. So what begins at an account level here, for example, with this 66510 account, would be the beginning of the budget creation for the fiscal year. So this navigation pane shows the low level of the hierarchy, and then that information is duplicated over here in what's called the content pane, where at the top you see this 8301, which is a department, and then within that department there are these 4 accounts, and then there's information over here that shows the state or the status of what's being worked. So these red donuts indicate that nothing has been done yet, that it's available for entry. The reserve means that work has been started. And then at the top, you can see within the hierarchy, the 8301 level, that work is, you can tell from this sort of half yellow circle, that work has been started below, but it has not yet been submitted for approval. And then over here, there's information about what this user could sign on and do in terms of their permissions. So the book indicates that someone has read-only access to the account. The pencil indicates that they would have edit access. The green arrow up indicates that they could submit it for approval. And in the blue box with the arrow down indicates that they also have reject possibility if they go into that account. So let me just go over to the sample payroll screen, and this is sample data. But what you'll see when we go into the application is that information in white. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Oh, okay. So the information in white indicates that that's the area that the user can enter in information. The information over here, the 104,000, indicates that that's a calculation or it's not available for editing directly. So what this is saying here is that this person, and this is my former colleague Eric Slaughter, this is completely fake information, but his salary for the current year was $94,000. He was given a salary adjustment of $10,000, and so the $104,000 is the addition of the previous 2 fields. And then what you're going to see is within the application, all of the budgeting is done by fund at the account level. So I'll be showing you how across the board, when you want to change something, you don't change it at the highest level, you change it at the lowest level within the account, which is the specific fund which is going to be paying for that person's salary based on the FTE percentage, which is this 0.20. So this person's salary was adjusted up to $104,000, and then within this fund, and it's so small that I can't even read it, but within this fund, 0.20 FTE, or 20% of that salary amount, is paid by a certain fund. Okay, and then finally, after we look at the application, we'll switch into the Cognos BDS reports, and I will show you the list of reports that are available. Include probably the ones that will be most useful are the second to the last one, which is the budget variance report, but also these adjustment reports. Because TM1 takes information from the general ledger and then imports it into the application, there are things that happen, and then we establish a budget as of the July 1 beginning of the fiscal year. Well, there are adjustments that happen throughout the year that are not going to be reflected in the TM1 application. So we created reports that people can use to reconcile that beginning year budget, add in or take out any adjustments that may have happened due to transfers or something, so that they have a good picture using the application and using the reports of where their budget stands versus budget versus actual. Okay, and with that, I will switch over to Firefox to start the web portion. Is everyone still seeing?
Still seeing the slide at the moment.
Seeing the slide at the moment. Let me try to share again. Okay. Okay, so let me share Firefox. And now?
Yeah, now we see it.
Okay. So I have already signed in as a user of the budget system who has access to a particular part of the hierarchy. And I should explain that the security will work for users who have access to the system, that they'll only be able to look at areas that they should be able to look at. So, partly that's probably due to the fact that it's salary information, but also there's no reason for other folks to be able to look at the budget information in the application for areas that are not their own. In the Cognos BI reports, however, it is open access. So while you can't go into the TM1 application that we're seeing right now and make any changes within the application, you can look at what has been entered or what has been done using the Cognos portion. So I'm going to open up this Budget Development System folder and then go into the Budget Development System workflows. And I apologize that I didn't open all these earlier, but I was afraid of timing out anyway, and I would have had to do it anyway, so I just thought we'd do it live. So let's go into the divisional workflow for this user. And so this user is the analogous to the division director for academic affairs. So and as I was explaining over here, so everything that this person has access to on the left in this navigation pane can be opened and expanded upon. And the area that we're going to look at, because I've been working on it in testing, is this. So what I did was I clicked through. So I started up here at the 8300 level, which is the division level. The 8330 is the subdivision for the VP Agriculture and Natural Resources. And then within that, the 8615 is the Department for Assistant Vice President Programs or Associate Vice President Programs, I'm not sure. And then within that, there are these three accounts. So here's where you can see, as I was explaining earlier, that work has been started for these accounts in terms of budget development. So in the content pane over here where it says, and can everyone see me moving the cursor? Is that visible only to me?
No, we see your cursor.
Okay. So over here where it says state, this red donut, as I explained earlier, indicates that this account is available for work. No one has, quote-unquote, taken ownership of it to begin the work process. Down here, where it's reserved, and you can see that earlier I was in here as the same user, indicates that someone has started working on it, but it has not yet been submitted. And so at the top, the owner of this, the department head here, who is responsible for these 3 accounts, shows that within this department, the work has been started, but it's not yet complete, indicated by this half yellow circle. So what I'm going to do is open up the account 440410. And this may take a couple of seconds as well as the contributor application opens. So again, we're looking at, well, before I even say that, let me just say, so what are we seeing here? So what we're seeing is a web browser with icons along the top, which users of the system will certainly become familiar with. But some of them look similar to Excel. Like here you've got a refresh button or a reset button. You've got an undo, redo. This is for looking at it in a grid view, looking at charts, and so on. So users of Excel will most likely, be somewhat familiar with these types of icons when they go to work in the application. So the application itself has these tabs across the top, and I believe there are 7 of them in total. So, and the first one, and the one that we're on at the moment, is the payroll tab. And I'm not going to probably have time to go into each tab to explain the system from soup to nuts. But conceptually, I think by looking at the payroll tab, we can understand how the budget information will be entered, as I was saying, by fund within this account 440410, which is shown up there at the top. So you always know where you are based on the browser, the top of the browser window, indicating exactly what area you're looking at. So what we have here is the payroll tab, and it's probably one of the most important areas of budgeting, in that the large portion of the budget is used to pay for people's salaries. So clicking on that plus sign, I can expand this down, and as I keep emphasizing, this is not real data. These may or may not be real people within the organization, I'm not sure, but the numbers have been made up. But in any case, we can see that there are 2 lines for filled career employees, and right here it shows that they're full-time and that they're 1 FTE, 1.00. The annual salary currently is $100,000. And over here, we can see what funds are being used to pay for those salaries. So the funds are broken down first into unrestricted and restricted, and then you click on the plus sign again to see which funds within unrestricted are paying for the salaries. And then we can look at restricted as well. But the first thing a user would want to do in making any adjustment to the salary or deciding what the person's salary is going to be next year is click on this little man icon, which is for taking ownership. So once I do that, then I will be able to make updates. Okay, so the screen will refresh. And as I explained on one of the slides, all of these numbers that are in gray, I can't touch those. But there are, and I hope this is clear on your screens as it is on mine, there are areas that are white where I can click, just as in Excel, and I can enter information. So let's say that I want to adjust Barbara Allen Diaz's salary up by a certain amount. Let's just say $12,500. Okay. So I enter that amount in there. So watch what happens to the new annual salary. It's going to be a calculation of the $100,000 plus the $12,500. Okay, and so this person's new annual salary for next fiscal year is $112,500. The totals at the top have changed, and then what was apportioned through these funds has also changed. So the way that salaries are apportioned through these funds are using FTE. So of course the assumption is for a full-time employee they're 100%, so or 1.00. So this 0.40 means that out of unrestricted funding, 40% of her salary is paid, and therefore, mathematically, then 60% of her salary is paid out of restricted funding. But let's just stick with these unrestricted funds. So 3 funds are showing up. Okay, educational fund, general fund, and system-wide assessment fund. So just by manipulating the FTEs, I can change this person's salary allocation. So right now, she's 40% allocated to, it's all 40% in system-wide assessment fund. But just for kicks, let's just say that I want to make 0.1 for the educational fund, 0.1 for the general fund, and then to make it mathematically correct, make this 0.2. Okay, so then I hit enter, and all of these fields have now been recalculated. And that is basically, in a nutshell, how all of these other tabs function. So individuals can go in, they can expand the funding for any line that they're looking at, whether it's supplies and expenses, whether it's employee salaries, and by fund, they can allocate how much is going to be spent out of that fund to pay for the line in question. So right now we're talking about salary. In a couple of minutes I'll show you the supplies and expense tab, but you'll see it functions in the same way. You click on the total fund amount is summarized, so I can close that here. And you see, okay, these are the total funds. All of the funds add up here. To see a breakdown of how things are paid between the unrestricted and the restricted, I can see that for Barbara, 40% is paid by unrestricted, and therefore 60% is paid by restricted. And clicking it again, I open up the unrestricted, all 3 of the unrestricted funds, and I see how that funding is allocated literally across the funds. Okay, so as I said, there are 5 or 6 tabs across the top, and the first one that people will work on, and the one they'll do a lot of work in, is in this payroll tab, which also calculates based on the salaries that are calculated a benefits percentage allocation that will likely be spent, which is an estimation of how much will be spent in benefits for the year. And so at the bottom you get this total with benefits for these salaries. All right. So also there are different types of employees at UCOP. There are provisional employees, there are temporary and contract employees, and all of that, if it's applicable to the account that you're working in, would feed into this screen. So I think it looks as though there are no temporary employees at the moment, at least allocated for this account, nor are there provisional employees. So if I click over here, there's not going to be any information. But the idea is that you can enter information on provisional employees on this Division Provisions tab. You can enter information on the Division Temp Contract tab for temporary employees so that you can track their funding, and all of that would flow into the Division Payroll tab. Okay, the other important area is the Supplies and Expense tab, and it's in here looking by subcode, and I hope I'm using terms that are familiar to most folks, but these subcodes are UCOP's method of accounting for the funding. So everything fits into a high-level subcode, and then within those subcodes there are categories. So this 03 is for supplies and expense, and then these are all the different categories within supplies and expense that are available. And you can see here, so what we're looking at is for the prior year, for example, for insurance, this is how much was spent last year, so that when you're creating the budget, you can use the prior year information to develop your current year budget. And I'm not going to go into the detail like I did on the payroll, because once it's demonstrated once, I think you get the idea. But I wanted to explain that the supplies and expense are broken out by these subcodes, And within these subcodes are various categories that you can look at within those categories, and those categories are repeated throughout the subs. But for tracking your supplies and expense budget, it's done on this supplies and expense permanent tab. And then the division account budget tab shows the overall view of the appropriations, the salary, adjustments that have been made, and then the supplies and expenses all in one spreadsheet. So it's sort of like a balance sheet for everything that will have been spent on budget for this account. So at the top we have all of the things related to salary expenses, and at the bottom we have everything related to supplies and expenses, and then you get a total number down at the bottom. And you can see here that earlier I had entered this adjustment amount in here, that we came up with a budget, but then we decided that we wanted to increase it by a certain amount, and that's where we entered it here on this in this adjustment area. Okay. Then there's a division distribution tab, which is mostly important for reporting. So when you're creating, and I'll show you in the budget variance reports, when you're creating budget variance reports, the assumption is that your budget is spent evenly throughout the 4 quarters. But if you know that in a certain quarter of the year you spend 40% of your budget, then you can enter 0.4 in here, and then enter 0.2, 0.2, and then the last field will be calculated. It's the difference of the first 3. So if I know that I spend 40% of my budget in educational funds for whatever reason in the first quarter of the year, and I want that reflected in my budget variance reports, so that 40% of my budget, I want to compare my expenses against 40% of the budget in the first quarter, because I know that I spend a lot in the first quarter, way more than 25%. Then that's what this would show. That's what would be reflected. Okay. And then these division budget office tabs are used strictly by the budget office, and there's a separate workflow and functionality that folks working in the divisions don't have access to, that the budget office has access to. And so this is their view of the budget as they're consolidating everybody's information. There are these 2 tabs so that they can make adjustments to the budget, or revised adjustments that have been made by the divisions as is needed. But that's done by a budget office user, as opposed to how I'm signed in right now as a divisional user on these 2 tabs. Okay. So are there any questions on the application or TM1 or anything I've explained thus far? Hopefully I'm not going too fast. I certainly understand if you want me to keep plowing on. I'll be glad to do so. So let me go back to, so I've explained that the application for TM1 is focused on this data entry and a user's ability to basically create their budget using this online tool. Well, after the budget is passed, come July 1, is when you want to start tracking your expenses against that budget. So why don't we go look at some of the Cognos reports that are used to do just that. Oh, actually, before I leave this, let's see. Oh, well, what I didn't do, and I should have done before I closed that screen, was I didn't commit the information to the database, and we would have seen a status change here. But as you, and I can go back in actually. So let's say that I have entered all this information. I'm satisfied that it's correct, and I want it to be reviewed by my manager. I click on this check mark to commit it. Okay, so now it's written to the database. It's no longer just being stored on, in a temporary cache. It's actually it's been committed to the database. So that the database has been modified, and I'm ready to submit this for review. So I go here to this upward-facing arrow in the green circle, and I can submit it. It asks me if I'm sure. I say yes. Okay, so now I cannot make any more changes to this account for the budget season unless and until it's rejected back to me because modifications are required by my manager. So now when I close this screen and I come back over here, okay, notice how this changed to a locked status. So that means that this is now available for review by the department manager. Once it's locked, then the person up at this level who's responsible for Department 8615 can come in and review, and then we'll have access to either approve or reject it back down to me for further work. Okay? So now I'm ready to go back and show you some of the reports. And a caveat with looking at the reports is that the information is not shared back and forth real time between the TM1 application and the BDS reports. There are daily extracts for updating information for the reports, but most of the important information that comes out of the GL will be extracted monthly. And that will happen after the monthly close, which will usually be around the middle of the month. So right now, when we go into the Cognos BDS reports, this is the list of reports that we have to choose from, and the one that's probably of most interest to folks who are tracking their budget to actuals would be the variance report by fund. And within that, the budget to actuals, as opposed to, you can compare, depending on what your interests are, when you need to create a report, you can create current year budget to prior year actuals, current year budget to prior year budget, and so on. But the most prevalent use of the variance reporting would be the current year budget to the current year actuals. So the information that I just created in TM1 will not be reflected in anything that I see in the report, even if I drill down into that same account, because the updates for the BI reports happen on a monthly basis. So that information will not be reflected in real time. But in any case, I can still look at that account, and just as in the TM1 application, these reports are also set up hierarchically so that you can go right into the division that you care about, 8300, into the subdivision that we're concerned with, which is 8330, and then Department 8615. So in here, I can create a report, and I can change the time period, but just for the first run, I'm going to create the default view, which is looking at the account information by category. And what we're going to be creating, I have to hit the update button. So what we have created is a budget variance report, current year budget to current year actuals by fund, and it's for account 440410 for the fiscal year 2011-2012. So this is fiscal year to date information as of October 2011. So the budget column here shows the entire fiscal year budget, and the expenses shows the first 4 months of the fiscal year, July through October. So the percent, you can see the percent spent should be, slightly above 25%, or I guess up to 33% since we're 1/3 through the fiscal year. And then over here in this column, and it's not going to be meaningful here because you're not likely to be over budget, but you can see that this is the amount that you're under budget by. This is how much you have to spend for the rest of the fiscal year based on the budgeted amount for salaries and benefits, for example. So this number plus this number adds up to this number. Okay, so let's say that I want to have a different view of the report, and I'm interested in looking at it by funds, because I know that there are funds in unrestricted. Let's say that I just want all the unrestricted funds. I click the Update button. Okay, so now just from the working in TM1, I know that the funding is that there is funding for this account in the unrestricted fund numbers, and I have created a fiscal year report. I can go down here, and I know that there are more pages because this page down is blue, and therefore I can click on it. So clicking down would take me to the individual funds that roll up into the unrestricted amount. So one of those funds, like we saw before, was the educational fund. So if you're interested in looking by fund, by account, by fund, you can do that sort of drill down. And here's a second example of another fund. So that's just a little bit of paging through the reporting. Let me go back up to the top. And again, just like in TM1, if you're interested, you can export this information into a PDF file. You can export it into Excel. And I've already done that. So because this is a multi-page fund, let me see if I can just share Excel. Okay. Can everyone see the Excel report?
Yes.
Okay. So this Excel report was created as an export from the portion of the screen that I was clicking on before to show that a multi-page report would be exported into Excel as a multi-tab Excel file. So this is the all-fund report for 440410. That's what I created earlier. And then the second page is the total of the unrestricted funds. And right here we're looking at the first quarter information only, July to September. So that's some of the functionality of the reports. Let me just jump back over here and explain. When we came in, and this is the default view, even though we're working down deep into the hierarchy at this account level, when you come back into this page, it always defaults to the high-level overview of the hierarchy, even though you've been working at a lower level. So if you want to, you can always save the report. Then you can name it whatever you want to, and then when you select OK, it can be saved into an area that you can come back to. So you can treat that report as a template or as a snapshot. So there's different methods of saving those things, but rather than coming in every time and starting with the hierarchy and drilling down, you can save your reports as a template, or you can save it as a snapshot if it's something that you want to come back to once a quarter, or compare with last quarter's report to this quarter's report or something like that. Okay, so jumping back to the presentation. Oh, here we are. Okay. So I just wanted to discuss briefly where we are in the TM1 delivery. So as I mentioned, the system is going live in January. That's the second bullet, but training began for the users of the system back in November. In October, we developed training materials. And the next TM1 development work to be conducted by IBM will be in the areas of capital markets financing. And that also is uniquely situated for forecasting because there's long-term financing of large building projects and funding for those projects and spending against those projects. So that's definitely perfectly situated for TM1 and plan versus actual. Likewise with the capital projects team, we're also working with them on developing on replacing a database two databases that they have right now and merging both into TM1 so that all the information is in one place, and so that they too can track the project life cycle in terms of planning, construction, equipment, and so on. And then we're also working with the grants management team because the grants folks receive funding from various sources and have to report back to the state how they're doing actuals versus the funding that they receive from the state or from sources like the tobacco fund or something like that. So these applications are in the pipeline. The capital projects of the three is probably the one that's farthest along, and that'll be the next thing that my team and I will be working on. So finally, if anyone has any questions, feel free to, if you ask them now, I'd be happy to answer, or if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me if you think of something later that you're interested in learning. But thank you, Emily, and thank you, everyone, for your time. If there are questions, I guess I should stay on the line for a little bit.
This is Dave Harmon from UCLA. Real simple question. The user training, is this the users just at UCOP, or they're at the UCs as well?
It is just at UCOP. So the user training that we're offering is for how people can use this budget development system for the budget cycle that's going to occur in January for UCOP specifically. Okay.
All right. Well, but how might this involve the UCs at some point? I mean, or is that? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense for, how this might be used, or is there a plan to roll this out for use by UCs, or?
There isn't a plan right now to roll out this budget system for use by the UCs. However, we'd be happy to work with you if you had a proposal and you wanted to submit that to Grace.
Okay.
And you saw a need for something similar or something, in a completely different area that you think that TM1 could be of value to you. Mm-hmm. And we certainly entertain all proposals, and Grace would be the one to decide, what's in the pipeline.
I just didn't know whether this would be there's plans to make this like a more, integrated with the other campuses, but okay.
Not at this time.
Okay, all right.
This is Kashif. I just had one quick comment, and that was that TM1. We should look at TM1 a little bit more holistically. In this context, it is set up for like a financial system, but it really has the capability to handle things beyond just financial numbers. I mean, if there are other applications that you think may fit in terms of what's unique about it, unlike the Cognos reporting, is that it gives users two things: the ability to read right back to the database and an approval workflow process. So there may be counts within a program for certain events or other things that it may lend itself well to. So I just encourage everyone to kind of also think outside of the box in terms of beyond using it for financial purposes. If there's other aggregate numbers or data entry that may be required, it may be something we wish to consider.
Thank you, Kasha.
All right. If there are no further questions, I think we will wrap this up here. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. We will, again, be resuming the Toolbox webinars in January, and we'll be sending out invitations shortly after the first of the year. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you in the new year.